It is always the season for the perfect pumpkin soup. And with the modern inventions such as the freezer, you can make a lot of it, store it in the freezer so that everyone in the family, including yourself, can simply help yourself to perfect pumpkin soup. Don't you agree? So let's get started. The main ingredients, of course, is the vegetable called the pumpkin. It is a seasonal vegetable, I think, in some countries. In other countries, it is a staple. No matter, it is a beautiful vegetable, and when done properly, it tastes so very good. But you need not just cook the pumpkin soup, you can always add other ingredients. For example, potato. The potato is not readily available in all countries. Some countries, they simply do not have access to the potato. But they do have access to other tube, such as this tube right here. It's the yellow yam. It is the world's fastest man, Usain Bolt's favorite food, and it is delicious. In dealing with the yam, of course, you have to understand that it does change color when you cut it up. Doesn't matter, because once it's in the soup, it is excellent. Then you have your seasoning. I happen to like garlic, onion, thyme, and pepper. You've got to be careful when you're handling this pepper. It happens to be one of the hottest peppers in the world. It's called the Scotch bonnet pepper. But I'm sure that in your culture, your country, you have an equivalent, and you've got to be equally as careful. The scallion, of course, is part of the seasoning that I use in making the pumpkin soup, and once it's all cut up like this, it's ready. Dumplings, of course, is an option. Some people will want it in their soup, some people will not. In Jamaica, they're called spinners because of the way they're made. I'll show you that later. But for now, let's get our seasoning in a frying pan just like this. We're going to put this in a frying pan with butter. That's right, butter on medium heat, and that's what you do. Now, I'm going to add something here. It's called coloring, but I'll show you how that is done later. For now, the coloring is added, and the seasoning smells so very good. Again, I use annatto seed to make my coloring, and this is what annatto seed looks like. It comes in a little jar like that, and this is what I use rather than using things such as yellow dye number 5 or yellow dye number 6. I use natural coloring. Annatto seed is added to oil. The oil is heated up really hot and then put aside. I happen to be using this vegetable soup mix. You may use any one you wish. In this particular one, I happen to like it, and it works very well for me. But back to the annatto. Once it's in the hot oil for about 2-3 minutes or so, this is what it looks like. The coloring is then transferred from the seeds to the oil, and the oil then is used to color their food. How much coloring you want to use, of course, is entirely up to you. This part of the soup making process is an option. If you do not eat meat, then you simply do not add this to the process. But if you do, what I did, I used the least expensive beef I could find. I then cut it up in bite-sized pieces, added some salt. And of course, if you're going to add salt, you might as well add some pepper. I did that. So salt and pepper is added, and this is, of course, part of the seasoning. You may want to add your own special type of seasoning to this beef. The beef is then placed in a plastic bag like that, and I add 2, maybe 3 tablespoonfuls of flour to the beef. Close the bag, shake it up really well so that the beef is coated with the flour. This is a part of the soup making process. Like I said, that's an option. Anyway, back to our seasoning. I then added the beef to the seasoning, and I added some annatto. Remember the oil that came from the annatto being transferred to the oil? Remember that? Okay. I add that to the pot, and everything is in the frying pan. Now what I'm doing here is browning the beef, really. Getting the beef and the seasoning together. A marriage, if you will. Beef and seasoning and beef. It's all part of the process. Once that is done, and this takes a little while, you just have to pay attention to it. By the way, I use a wooden spoon because I don't want to scratch up my pot. Eventually it'll look like this. Doesn't that look good? Keep in mind, this is not thoroughly cooked. The beef is still raw. It is not cooked. It's simply mixed with your seasoning, which of course you're going to use to add to your pot. Correct? All right. Then of course it is a soup, isn't it? So we'll add water. 2 cups, 3 cups, 4 cups, depends upon how many people you'll be cooking for. Large family, you add more water. Smaller family, perhaps less. Everything depends upon the size of your need, the amount of people you need to feed. Now, here I'm using this soup mix. This is the Grace vegetable soup mix, and I use this because I happen to like this. So in addition to the cold water in the pot, I will add the soup mix. Why? Because the soup mix calls for cold water. And then mix it really well. Once it's all mixed in with the water, I will then turn the thing on, the stove on, to get it good and hot. Once it starts to boil, then I begin to add my pumpkin, my vegetable. Just so happens that I'm adding pumpkin, I'm adding potato, and I'm adding yam. And to all that, I now add the beef. Remember this? Beef mixed with my seasoning. It is so delicious. So delicious. Smells good. Not cooked quite yet though. Smells good though. And there it is. I bring everything to a boil. Everything. Oh gosh, you should smell this. This is now an excellent time for you to add everything else that you want to go into your soup. Why not? It is your creation after all. And once that is done, you put the lid on, let it simmer for about an hour, maybe 2 hours. Check the meat, that's your barometer. If the meat is thoroughly cooked, your soup is ready. That is the pumpkin soup. About 30 minutes just prior to serving this soup, I will then make the dumplings. Keep in mind, by the way, that all the time your soup is covered. And now for the dumplings. This is the way I make the dumplings. Spinners, as they're called in Jamaica. By the way, while I'm cooking the soup, I'm enjoying a glass of wine. I hope you don't mind. But this is what I do. I will add some butter to the flour, and then I'll mix the butter in to the flour really well. Mix it in really well. I do this because I want nice soft dumplings. I don't want them to be hard as a rock. Once that is done, of course, the only thing that's left here now is to add a little bit of water, just enough water to make a dough. And this is all by experience. By the way, you see how yellow that dough is? That's because I got carried away and I added some of my annatto coloring to it. Why not? Then I make some spinners. Put a little chunk of dough in your hand and you simply rub your hand together and you get spinners. Once that is done, about 30 minutes prior to the soup being served, it's still simmering, mind you, I will add the spinners to the soup, just like that. I will then put the lid back on after I've separated each of these little spinners into their own little world. I'll add the lid back on, and then I'll let it simmer again for an additional 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, and then voila, the soup is done, ready to be served. It is really very, very good and very, very cold days. Did you know that? Anyway, write to me. Let me know your suggestions how I could have made it better. Bon appetit.